Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. My name is Carrie. This is where I talk about knitting, my tips, my tricks, my opinions, and my preferences. Today, we're talking about yarn. Why? Because we are heading into a heavy knitting season. Fall is here, winter is coming, and the holidays are upon us. A lot of us start knitting a whole lot more once the weather cools down and the gift giving season is near. So what does that mean? That means that we are looking for yarn a lot of times. We are looking for lots of yarn. Sometimes we need economical choices for our projects. The question is, are there really good yarns to use at more affordable prices? Well, I bought 4 different brands of yarn from Joann's, hashtag not sponsored, hashtag not an affiliate, and I'm reviewing them for you today. We're gonna find out which ones have accurate yarn labels, which ones feel good in the hands, which ones maybe don't so much, and is there really a difference between economical choices of yarn that you can find at a big box store. If you wanna find out all about this, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell. Don't forget to give my video a thumbs up, and let's talk about yarn. I did buy all the yarn from Joann's. I am not an affiliate with Joann's, although full disclosure, I have applied to their affiliate program. I just haven't been accepted yet. I chose Joann's to buy my yarn, quite frankly, because it is the largest big box store that's near me, and I know it's one that's near many people, and I started the process of this review before I joined any affiliate programs. If you go down the description box, however, I will have links to all the materials in this video. Some of these links will be affiliate links. These will be clearly marked. If you want to learn more about affiliate links, why I use them, how they help support my channel, you can always check out my FAQ at knitswhereit'sat.com. You've probably figured out already, the most economical yarns that you're going to find, especially at a big box store, are going to be acrylic yarn. So that is what I am testing today. I have ranked these yarns from sort of my least recommended to my most recommended. I know that some people right off the bat are going to be like,
ugh, acrylic yarn. Like, Carrie, it's so whatever. It's not environmentally friendly. I prefer natural fibers.
I'm all for bringing our values into our crafting space, and I understand the environmental concerns around acrylic fibers. And I agree with those concerns. However, I also believe in affordability for people to craft, because affordability is accessibility. And also, it's not just about affordability. It is also about the fact there are people who are allergic to wool. So I think when people choose to knit with acrylic yarn, we shouldn't assume A, that they don't have a good reason for it, and B, they're not enjoying their knitting and they're just knitting with crap. And I think we should just remove the stigma of it and say, and trust that individual knitters are making the best choices they can in terms of their knitting, and it's fine to express your personal preference. Like, I'm all about expressing personal preferences, please. But I think we have to find ways to express our personal preference where we're expressing it's like, this is the thing I enjoy. This is my yum, without yucking someone else's yum. You have to do what you need to do. You do your knitting the way you want to do it, because you are the boss of your knitting. And with that spirit in mind, I really wanted to do a review of yarns that was focused on inexpensive, economical yarns that people can turn to. And acrylic yarn has come a long way, baby. It really has. So with all that said, let's jump into the reviews. As always, I hope that you watch the whole video at least once. However, if you want to skip around to what you are most interested in, you can always find timestamps down in the description box below. My least recommended yarn at number 4, I don't think is going to be a huge surprise, and that is the Red Heart Super Saver. I did not have high hopes going into this review process for this yarn. I am not unfamiliar with working with this yarn. In fact, this yarn was, I think, Red Heart Super Saver was the first yarn I ever bought when I was learning to knit. I think a lot of knitters, when they first learned to knit using the Red Heart Super Saver. Why? Well, it's called Super Saver for a reason. This regularly retails at $3.69 a ball, and each skein is 364 yards. So $3.69 divided by 364 yards equals like a penny a yard. So this is very inexpensive yarn, but I didn't pay full price for this, and that's one of the things about shopping at like a Joann's or a Michael's or where have you, where very rarely should you ever pay full price for anything at the stores, because the big box stores always have coupons going on. They always have sales happening. So really there's no reason to ever pay full price for one of these balls of yarn. So I did the wraps per inch on this ball. Used my wraps per inch tool, and I did enough wraps over 3 inches. When I was done, I had about 29 wraps over 3 inches, and after doing the math, that ended up being around 9.666666 for infinity. So rounding that up to 10 wraps per inch, I could then look at my card, and sure enough, 10 wraps per inch is right in the worsted weight category. This is the gauge swatch that I knitted with it. I knitted this on the recommended size 9 needle. And I have to say, just from the eyeball test, this to me is a perfectly acceptable result for a worsted weighted yarn. I think the stitches look fine. They don't look too big. They don't look too small. Let's look at what the stitches per inch are. So I'm going to just put my ruler down. And we're going to count stitches. Let me grab a needle to make this easier. That's lined up. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. So this is about 25 stitches over 6 inches. So that means that it is about 4.5-ish stitches per inch. And the gauge given on the ball band is 17 stitches per 4 inch, which is right around 4.5 stitches per inch. So the ball band information for this yarn is very accurate. If you were wanting to look at the Super Saver to substitute yarn, your ball band would not lead you astray. And I think that's actually a really important quality for any yarn, for especially a commercially produced yarn like the Red Heart Super Saver. Now, in terms of how this yarn felt in the hand while I was knitting, I'm going to tell you right now up front, I did not have high expectations for this yarn. Why? Because in my experience, whenever I've gone to the yarn store and, or Joann's, and I'm feeling the balls of yarn and sniffing them because I smell yarn, like you do too. You know you do. Anyway, whatever. But I'm feeling the yarn. Red Heart Super Saver is always one where I touch it and I almost immediately am like, ugh. I don't like the feel of that. I was very surprised when I first picked up this yarn and I felt it and I went, this doesn't feel as rough as I remember. And immediately I'm like, okay, have I been misremembering? Or is it because this is a light color of yarn, but if I go to the store and I touch a red, like a real deep red, or a darker yarn, is it going to have that feeling I remember, just kind of being rough and a little scratchy and not the most, refined feel to it? So yes, I did go to Joann's just to feel the yarns, and here's a deep red, and it wasn't as scratchy, but it was definitely rougher than this white yarn here. But here's where the noticeable, this blue felt terrible. I did not like the way it felt. It was very rough. The pumpkin orange wasn't as rough, but there was definitely a big difference between different colors on how this yarn felt. So I think that Red Heart is definitely a brand that if you're looking at this, because the price point, you really want to feel the colors that you're looking at and know what you're getting into in terms of how it would feel. That said, as I knitted with this, the yarn was not splitty in any way, so that was perfectly fine. But the feel in my hand was okay. I didn't hate it. I wasn't like miserable while I was knitting with this yarn, but it wasn't the most pleasant experience either. And when I was knitting this swatch, it was particularly hot outside, so my hands were a little, pardon that I'm about to say moist, but they were a little moist. And I definitely got, there's something weird that happens with some acrylics when it's warm out, and the acrylic almost gets almost like this subtly oily feel in your hand, and it's not terrible, but it wasn't the most pleasant experience. That feeling tended to go away when I got out of my craft room, out from underneath the lights, and I was just knitting on my couch, and it was a little bit cooler of an environment. With the Red Heart Super Saver, I will say that after it was washed and blocked, it did soften up a little bit. It didn't feel as rough as the ball of yarn did. So washing and blocking definitely has an effect on the yarn, and kind of an experiment I want to do now is to get some of the roughest acrylic yarn that I can find and see, okay, after knitting with it and washing and blocking it, does it soften up? Wearing the Red Heart Super Saver against my skin for a couple of hours, I will say that it didn't feel terrible. Like, it's not like I was sitting there going, oh God, this fabric is so uncomfortable on my skin and get it off me. No, it wasn't like that at all. It was pretty innocuous. It was there. So I wouldn't say like if you were to knit a garment with this yarn that you would then have an acrylic sweater that was particularly uncomfortable. Is it the softest? No. And you can get softer acrylic yarns than what the Red Heart Super Saver is. And frankly, there are better acrylic yarns from Red Heart. They have a Red Heart yarn that's called Soft. That's softer than this. Like, I haven't knitted with that yarn. I don't know how splitty it may be or anything like that, but I feel like the Red Heart Super Saver is kind of a yarn that probably should just be retired because there's better options out there. Number 3 on my list is the yarn that probably has flummoxed me the most and in some ways disappointed me the most, and that is the Lion Brand Basic Stitch. Lion Brand used to make what was my favorite acrylic yarn, even though it was a little bit more expensive as far as acrylic yarns went, and that was the Vanna's Choice. And I really liked that yarn. It was actually an acrylic polyester blend. It was all man-made fibers, but it wasn't just acrylic, and it was just a very nice, you know, man-made fiber yarn. I liked it a lot. So I had high hopes for the Basic Stitch. This is regularly priced at $4.99 for 219 yards. So this is around 2 cents per yard. You get a yarn that is definitely softer than what you find with the Red Heart Super Saver. Also, when I went to Joann's to feel out the yarns, I would say that overall it was pretty consistent. There were a couple of colors that I touched that felt a little rougher, not as pleasant, but overall I found that the feel from color to color was consistent and perfectly fine. However, in terms of the yarn itself, let me find the end. Here we go. Here's the end. This yarn, I have to get this out of the way now from this yarn because I just think without even doing the reps per inch on this yarn, just looking at it, I can tell you right now that this yarn is definitely thinner than the Red Heart. And that's not necessarily a problem. You got to remember, with yarn weights, there's always a bit of a range of what the actual size is going to be for a worsted weighted yarn between brands or even between particular models of yarn from a brand. But this, looking at it, I was like, that's a worsted weighted yarn? Really? Really? I had my doubts, but putting a pin in that for a moment, It's a little limper. I would not in any way say this looks or feels bouncy, but it has elasticity. I mean, you can stretch it, it's going to bounce back. And if I split the plies, which of course this is a different weighted yarn, it's just 3 plies. I mean, that's the other thing. This is a 3-ply yarn. This is not a 4-ply yarn like the Red Heart Super Saver. I don't know why they're calling this a worsted weighted yarn. Anyway, it's 3 plies. I first heard about and started looking at this yarn when I did my video on yarn substitution, which I will link up here. And after I bought this yarn, I did the wraps per inch. I did the wraps per inch of this ball of yarn during a live stream. I've done the wraps per inch on this yarn many, many times. Every single time, it measures out to a DK weighted yarn. But let's look at the swatches real quick. Quick note, I had video of me doing the wraps per inch, testing out this yarn, everything, and somehow it got lost. So that's why I can't show you everything with this video, with this swatch the way I had hoped to, but everything I'm about to say is genuinely true. This is a good example of what can happen through washing and blocking, because when I first knitted this, it was very loose, and I was sitting there going, I don't think this is a worsted weighted yarn. The recommended gauge on the ball band said that this should come out to 4 stitches per inch, and yet I did the swatch and it was like more like 5 stitches per inch, which meant that I needed to go up a needle size. And in my opinion, the swatch was just on the edge of looking like the tension was too loose anyway, so I couldn't imagine going up a needle size. I have since washed and blocked this, and now the gauge is right in the ballpark of what their recommended gauge size is. What that tells me is that this yarn shrinks up quite a bit after you throw it in the washer and the dryer, which is really interesting. But that also tells me that I don't trust this yarn. I just don't trust this yarn because the wraps per inch is like 12 wraps per inch. It's like DK weighted, or I think the most accurate thing to say about this yarn in terms of its yarn weight is that it is a lighter worsted weighted yarn, and you really have to be careful in terms of looking at the gauge information and gauging this yarn to know whether this is going to be an appropriate yarn to substitute with. Granted, that's true anytime you do a yarn substitution. However, I think this one you have to be particularly careful with because of the difference that I have seen between what the gauge is before you wash it and dry it, and then after you wash it and dry it, because this shrank up. Now, in terms of knitting with this yarn, it was fine. It wasn't splitty, so that's always a plus. I like it when a yarn is not splitty, but it did have kind of a weird feel to it at times while I was knitting, kind of similar to the Red Heart Super Saver, where as I was knitting with it, it just had kind of this weird, almost oily feel to it. It wasn't the most pleasant experience in the world. It wasn't terrible, it just wasn't my favorite thing. Now, in terms of washing, something I want to point out with this yarn, notice that this tail is shredded. This tail, not so much. But even this tail of the yarn, right? I don't know if you can totally tell in this video, but it's definitely a little bit fuzzy. What that tells me is this yarn is probably going to pill faster than other acrylic yarns might. And that's something you can expect from yarns that acrylic yarns that feel softer, is that you're going to tend to pill up faster. Compare that with the Super Saver. I mean, I'll say this about Super Saver. This is a hard wearing yarn because like I washed it, there's some fuzz, but not a whole lot. Look at this end. Like there's some unraveling that has occurred on that tail as it went through the washer, but the yarn itself isn't like shredded. Compare that to this tail of the Lion brand yarn. So every acrylic yarn is going to pill to some degree. That's just the nature of the beast. We also have to accept this fact of life, but how quickly it pills will vary between balls. And I will say this about the basic stitch, one last thing. The quality of the acrylic yarn itself is fine. My issues with, yes, it had a little bit of a weird feel to it as I was knitting, but when I wore it against my skin, it felt fine. It felt very soft. It felt very nice against the skin. So I think washing and blocking it really kind of like helps those fibers for whatever reason quite a bit with the Lion brand basic stitch. But yeah, it's fine. I think that it's really ranked at number 3 for me because that ball band information and how much the gauge swatch shrank up. It's not a yarn I feel like I can trust. Number 2, I think might be the most controversial acrylic yarn that I'm reviewing in this video, and that is the Carrie Simply Soft. Right off the bat, I'm going to say that this was a yarn before I did the review that I'm already very familiar with. I personally have always enjoyed working with Carrie Simply Soft. It is incredibly, incredibly soft. I would dare say this is the softest acrylic yarn that I have personally found out on the market, especially at a big box store. But, I have seen many people hate this yarn. And the reason they don't always like Simply Soft is because it is splitty. And I have to agree, this is a splitty yarn. But let's get into the details of this yarn a little bit before we continue on with the review. Carrie Simply Soft is priced the same as the basic stitch. This is $4.99 per skein. And each skein has 315 yards. So even though this is priced the same as the basic stitch, this is going to be less expensive because you get more yardage. So it is $4.99 divided by 315 equals about a penny. This is around the same price as the Super Saver. It's the fraction of a penny more. Like, this is incredibly inexpensive. The yarn itself, looking at it, it's a little more limp. I wouldn't call it bouncy or fluffy. It's a little bit more limp of a yarn. It does have elasticity, so I can pull this and it's going to bounce back, right? But there is something about the way this yarn lays in the hand that almost reminds me of cotton. Here is the swatch for this yarn. So I knitted this swatch on a size 8, and I will say I think that the swatch is perfectly acceptable. I think it's probably just on the edge of being too loose. Like if I were to go up another needle size, I probably would think that the tension was too loose, but I think this is perfectly acceptable. Here's the thing, when I measured the reps per inch for this yarn, I had the dickens of the time measuring the reps per inch. For some reason, I just never got a consistent reps per inch on it, and it just kind of was right around worsted to DK when I did it. I would say that this yarn is a lighter worsted weighted yarn than definitely the Super Saver, although this, like the Super Saver, is a 4-ply yarn. So let's just count the stitches per inch. 21, 22, 23, 24, 25 stitches per 6 inches. So 25 divided by 6 is 4 stitches per, like 4.1 stitches per inch. So I would round that down to 4 stitches per inch. And the ball band says that it's 18 stitches per 4, so that's 4.5. So if I were to try to get to the recommended gauge on the ball band, I would need to go up, or I would have to go down a needle size to a size 7, which isn't a real big surprise. I tend to have to go down a needle size. I'm a little bit of a looser knitter than a tighter knitter. In terms of knitting with the yarn, the feel of the yarn as you're knitting is very pleasant. It's so soft. It doesn't have any of that sort of weird, almost oily acrylic feel to it the way that the Basic Stitch or the Super Saver had. But The knock on this yarn, and it is a legitimate knock on this yarn, and it is the thing that frustrates me with Care and Simply Soft, is it is a splitty yarn. It's just spun more loosely than some of the other acrylic yarns that I've worked with, and it's splitty. There's no way around it. Some people aren't going to mind that. Some people that's going to be a deal breaker, and it's up to you whether that's going to work for you or not. So washing and blocking for this yarn, it held up okay. You can see this tail shredded, very similar to the Lion brand basic stitch. I'm telling you, the basic stitch and this yarn are incredibly similar, and if you're looking at the two between them, choose this one. But this end held up pretty well, but there is some fuzziness. And I can tell you from my experience of working with this yarn on other projects is this does tend to pill a little bit and get a little bit fuzzy. I wouldn't say it doesn't hold up. It holds up, but it does pill more. I rank this at number 2 because even though this yarn has problems, it's splitty, it can pill, blah, blah, blah. It's so incredibly soft that it's really good for the right kind of project. If you're making a baby blanket, if you're doing any kind of toy, anything like that, this is a really good yarn to look at. It's really inexpensive. It's right on point with the Red Heart Super Saver, but it's a softer, nicer yarn to work with. So my number 1 recommended economic yarn that I could get at Joann's is the Joann branded Big Twist yarn. I know this seems like, oh, sure, you want to be an affiliate at Joann's, Carrie. Of course you're going to think this is the number 1 yarn. I did not expect this to be my favorite, most recommended yarn from these balls that I was looking at. Truly, truly I was not. However, almost on every single point that I was looking at in terms of yarn, this came out ahead. Or at least, if not ahead, equal to everything else. So let's just, first of all, let's look at the price of this yarn. We think of the Red Heart Super Saver as being the least expensive yarn that you can find. It's not. The Big Twist yarn is $3.49 per skein for, let me look at it again, make sure I get this number right, for 380 yards. So this is 380 yards for $3.49. That is less than a penny per yard. So this is actually the least expensive yarn of all the ones that I looked at. But unlike the Red Heart Super Saver, you're not giving up on the texture of this yarn for that price. Just looking at the yarn itself, to me, it just looks surprisingly bouncy and fluffy. And when I do kind of the elasticity test, it just goes back, snaps back very nicely. But it just has a fluffiness to it that is similar to the Red Heart Super Saver. In fact, I would say this is comparable to the Red Heart Super Saver, only it's better because it's softer. When I did the wraps per inch, it was totally what you would expect for a worsted weighted yarn. So here is my gauge swatch. This is totally what you would want to see from a worsted weighted yarn in terms of its knit. And this is with the recommended needle size. And we're going to just, whoops, needle down. Here we go. We're going to measure this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 21, 22, 23, 24. This is 24.5 stitches per 6 inches. I got a half stitch there, so 24.5 divided by 6 is about 4 stitches per inch, 4.08. And its recommended is 18.4, which is 4.5 stitches per inch. So I would need to go down a needle size on this in order to get to gauge, and I think that would be perfectly fine for this yarn, although truthfully, I really like this gauge. And in terms of knitting with it, it was very pleasant. like I said, it's soft. This is soft in the hand. It's not as soft as the Caron Simply Soft. It's not, but it's pretty damn soft. And I found that the consistency between different colors of this brand was pretty consistent. There were some colors that I touched that felt a little rougher, that wasn't as soft as this, but overall, the balls that I touched, that's what she said, felt nice. So that's what she said. So yeah, I really have nothing in terms of an acrylic yarn to say bad about this. In terms of holding up in the wash, well, let's look at this tail. A little bit of shredding at the end, but not much. And this side, very little fuzziness. So this yarn, it would totally hold up. I'm a fan of the Joann's Big Twist. I did not expect to be. I thought that it would be fine, that it would be perfectly acceptable acrylic yarn, and that the big advantage of this yarn would just be its price point, because its price point is amazing. Like, it's amazing what happens when a store doesn't have to pay a wholesale and just buys it right from a manufacturer. Like, I'm going to tell you right now, I will absolutely link to Caron's and the Red Heart Super Saver and all of these yarns. I'm going to link to affiliate codes with these. All right? And I'm still going to tell you to go and tell you that the Big Twist is your best option. And I will get nothing. I will get no commission for telling you this. So, never doubt that I will tell you the truth about my reviews. Always. It's more important to me than anything. Because if I don't have your trust, I ain't got nothing. So, there it is. My thoughts about the affordable yarns you can find at Joann's, and a little bit of a manifesto about yarn shaming. I would love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. Do you like using acrylic yarn? Do you avoid acrylic yarn, even for moms? And you're like, nope, I'll knit that cotton. I would love to know your opinion. What yarns do you love? What yarns do you not love? And also, what do you think about yarn shaming? What do you think about yarn snobbery? Do you think that it's time that we figure out a way to talk about all of this without making people feel ashamed? I would love to hear your thoughts about this. Also, please don't forget to like my video. Liking my video, commenting on my videos lets YouTube know that this is a space worth checking out and helps other knitters, fiber people find me. If you have not already, please make sure to hit subscribe and the notification bell. Hitting the notification bell lets you know whenever I upload a new video or I'm having a live stream every Sunday at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern is Knit Tea Live. We get together for an hour, sometimes a little bit longer, and talk about knitting, whatever topic I have for that week. I often will do a fiber or a pattern spotlight, which just looks at some patterns, either new releases that I'm featuring on Fiber Happenings. You can find Fiber Happenings at my website, knitswhereitsat.com. and various things. It's a really good time. You can always find us. Again, that is on Sunday at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. So thank you again for joining me. I hope you have a wonderful day, evening, weekend, weeknight, whenever you may be watching this. And as always, happy health and happy knitting. Bye. I would love to hear your thoughts down in the description box. I keep saying that. It's not in the description box. It's in the comments. This is the worst wrap up I've ever done. It's just like, whoa. All right, let me start over. Today is going to be an opinion and blah, 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 blah. First I had to purchase the yarns. I was testing them out. Blah, blah, blah. I'm going to give a caveat right here. I'm going to give a caveat right here. Don't want to forget my PSA. Voting season is upon us. This past week, Texas began its early in-person voting. No matter where you live in the country, please make sure you have a plan to vote. You can always go to vote.org and find out what you need to do to make sure you are ready to vote this election season in your area. So again, that is vote.org. There will be a link down in the description box. Please, your voice matters, your voice matters, your vote matters. Let's get together and get it done for 2020. Because, God, we need something good for 2020. We need something good.